The telegram had arrived 3 weeks before the woman herself, and Yates Anderson had read it so many times the paper had worn soft at the creases. He stood on the wooden platform at Fort Stanton, New Mexico Territory, on that scorching August morning in 1876, watching the steam engine slow to a stop, his heart hammering harder than it had during any cattle drive or standoff with rustlers. The advertisement in the San Francisco newspaper had seemed like the answer to his loneliness, but now that the moment had arrived, doubt crept through his chest like morning frost. Black smoke billowed into the cloudless sky as passengers began to disembark. Yates was a tall man, lean and weathered from 26 years under the relentless sun, his brown hair perpetually dusty no matter how often he washed it. His ranch hands had teased him mercilessly about this venture, but they did not understand the silence that filled his house each evening, the emptiness that no amount of hard work could chase away. Then he saw her. She stood at the top of the train steps, gripping the railing with white knuckles, her dark hair pulled back beneath a simple bonnet. She wore a traveling dress of faded blue, clearly her best garment but worn from the long journey. Her eyes swept the platform with something between hope and terror, and when they landed on him, the only man standing alone with a bouquet of wildflowers clutched awkwardly in his calloused hands, she drew in a visible breath. Yates stepped forward, removing his hat. "Miss Helena Jankowski." She descended the steps carefully, a small carpet bag in one hand. When she reached the platform, she was smaller than he had imagined, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. She looked up at him with eyes the color of chestnuts and spoke in a language he did not understand, her voice soft and musical despite the tremor of nervousness. His stomach dropped. The agency had said nothing about a language barrier. He held out the flowers, feeling foolish. "I'm Yates Anderson. We've been writing." She took the flowers, her fingers brushing his, and said something else in that same foreign tongue. Polish, he realized, remembering the surname. She must be speaking Polish. A smile flickered across her face, tentative but genuine, and she touched her chest. "Helena." "Helena," he repeated, pronouncing it the way she had, with a softer sound to the first letter. The name felt right in his mouth. He gestured toward his wagon. "Let me get your trunk." She followed his gesture and nodded, pointing to a battered trunk being unloaded from the baggage car. Together they walked toward it, and Yates noticed the stares from townspeople gathered at the station. Fort Stanton was a military town, rough around the edges, where most women were either army wives or worked in the saloons. A mail-order bride was novelty enough, but one who could not speak English would set tongues wagging for months. He loaded her trunk into the wagon bed, muscles straining under the weight. She had packed her whole life into that chest. When he turned, she was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Fear, regret, hope. Perhaps all three. The ride to his ranch took 40 minutes, and they were the longest 40 minutes of Yates's life. He tried several times to make conversation, pointing out landmarks, but each attempt fell flat against the wall of incomprehension between them. Helena sat rigid beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the wildflowers resting across her knees. Finally, desperate to ease the tension, he pointed to himself. "Yates," then to her. "Helena." She nodded. He pointed to a bird soaring overhead. "Bird." He flapped his arms slightly, feeling ridiculous. For the first time, Helena laughed. It was a small sound, quickly stifled behind her hand, but it transformed her face. She pointed at the bird and attempted the word. "Beard." "Close enough," Yates said, grinning. He pointed to a horse in a nearby field. "Horse." "Horse," she repeated, her accent thick but the word recognizable. They continued this way for the remainder of the journey, Yates naming everything he could point to. Helena repeating each word with varying degrees of success. By the time his ranch came into view, the air between them had warmed considerably. The Anderson ranch was modest but well-maintained. A two-room house with a covered porch, a barn, a chicken coop, and corrals stretching toward the distant mountains. 200 head of cattle grazed on his land, and he employed 3 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse near the barn. It was not much, but it was his, built with his own sweat and determination after mustering out of the army 5 years prior. Helena's eyes widened as they approached. She said something in Polish, her tone almost reverent, and Yates wished desperately that he could understand. Was she pleased? Disappointed? He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and helped her down, his hand spanning her waist. She felt delicate under his touch, and he set her down as gently as if she were spun glass. The front door burst open, and his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, emerged. The older Chinese woman had worked for Yates for 2 years, keeping his house in order and cooking meals that reminded him there was more to life than hardtack and beans. She took one look at Helena and immediately began speaking in rapid Cantonese, gesturing for the young woman to come inside. Helena looked at Yates, uncertainty written across her features. He nodded encouragingly. "It's all right. Mrs. Chen will help you get settled." Though she could not understand his words, Helena seemed to grasp his meaning. She followed Mrs. Chen into the house, and Yates stood in his yard, wondering what he had gotten himself into. They could not even speak to each other. How were they supposed to build a marriage? His foreman, Jack Riley, ambled over from the barn, barely suppressing a grin. "Well, boss, she sure is prettier than that ornery bull we bought last month." "Shut up, Jack," Yates said without heat. "You planning to marry someone who cannot understand a word you say?" Yates hefted Helena's trunk from the wagon. "The preacher is coming Sunday. That gives me 3 days to figure something out." Inside, the house smelled of the stew Mrs. Chen had prepared. Helena stood in the main room, slowly turning in a circle, taking in the stone fireplace, the simple furniture, the rag rugs on the wooden floor. When she saw Yates, she smiled and said something, her hand sweeping to encompass the room. Mrs. Chen, who had picked up enough English over the years to communicate, said, "She says is nice. Good house." Relief flooded through Yates. "Tell her thank you. Tell her I hope she will be happy here." Mrs. Chen translated, and Helena's response came back. "She hopes too." That evening they sat down to dinner together, Mrs. Chen serving as their interpreter. It was awkward at first, each sentence requiring translation, but gradually Yates began to learn things about his bride-to-be. She was 22 years old. She had come from a small village outside Warsaw. Her parents had died of fever 2 years ago, and her brother had used the last of the family money to send her to America, believing she would have a better life here. She had worked as a seamstress, and she loved to read, though she had owned only 3 books in her entire life. In return, Yates told her about his life. Growing up in Missouri, joining the cavalry at 18, fighting in the last years of the Indian Wars, and finally settling here to build something of his own. He told her about the loneliness of the frontier, the harsh beauty of the land, and his hope that together they might build a family. As Mrs. Chen translated his words, Helena's eyes never left his face. When he finished, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her skin was soft despite the calluses he could feel from years of needlework. She spoke, and Mrs. Chen translated. "She says she will try to be a good wife. She will work hard. She asks only that you be patient while she learns." Yates turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "Tell her I will be patient. Tell her I will do everything I can to make her happy." That night, Helena slept in Yates's bed while he took the settee in the main room. It would not be proper to share a bed until after the wedding, regardless of the miles between them and conventional society. He lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in his home, wondering if he was doing the right thing. The next morning, Yates woke to the smell of fresh bread. He found Helena in the kitchen, flour dusting her nose, pulling golden loaves from the oven. She beamed at him, clearly proud of her handiwork, and said something he did not understand but could easily interpret. She had made breakfast. Mrs. Chen had not yet arrived for the day, so they ate in companionable silence, communicating through smiles and gestures. After breakfast, Yates knew he had to get back to work. The ranch would not run itself. He tried to explain this to Helena, pointing to the door, then the fields, pantomiming riding a horse. She nodded, understanding, and made a shooing motion with her hands, then pointed to herself and around the house. She would work here while he worked there. Over the next 2 days, they fell into a rhythm. Yates worked from sunup to sundown, repairing fences, checking on the cattle, and managing his small crew. Helena cleaned the house until it shone, mended clothes that had needed attention for months, and cooked meals that made the ranch hands nearly weep with joy. But more importantly, they worked on the language barrier. Every evening after the dishes were cleared, Yates would sit with Helena at the table, teaching her English words. He started with simple things: table, chair, spoon, bread. She was a quick study, her mind sharp and her determination fierce. Within 2 days, she could name every object in the house and string together simple phrases. "Good morning, Yates. Thank you for breakfast. The day is hot." In return, she taught him Polish words. He struggled far more than she did, his tongue stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds, but Helena never laughed at his attempts. Instead, she would gently correct his pronunciation, her fingers sometimes touching his lips to show him how to shape the sounds. Those moments when she touched him sent electricity through Yates's veins. He found himself noticing everything about her: the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when concentrating, the small humming sounds she made while cooking, the grace in her movements despite the rough surroundings. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was strong. She had crossed an ocean alone, had left everything familiar behind, and she faced each new challenge with quiet courage. On Saturday evening, the night before their wedding, Mrs. Chen prepared a special dinner. The older woman had grown fond of Helena, teaching her the locations of supplies, showing her how to work the cantankerous stove, and sharing knowing looks with Yates when Helena was not watching. After dinner, Mrs. Chen excused herself, leaving Yates and Helena alone. They moved to the porch, where the evening air provided relief from the day's heat. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible anywhere but the west. Helena sighed, a sound of contentment, and Yates found himself studying her profile. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "About tomorrow," she turned to him, her brow furrowed as she worked through the English words. "Nervous," she repeated, testing the word. He touched his chest over his heart and pantomimed it beating fast. "Ah." Understanding lit her face. She nodded. "Yes, nervous. But also." She struggled for the word, then said something in Polish. "I do not know that one," Yates said gently. Helena thought for a moment, then smiled. She took his hand and placed it over her heart. He could feel it beating steadily beneath his palm, strong and sure. "Happy," she finally said. "Nervous and happy." Yates's throat tightened. "I am too, both of those things." They sat in silence for a while, hands still clasped. Finally, Helena spoke, her words slow and careful. "You are a good man, Yates Anderson. I see this. You are patient. You are kind. Tomorrow I will be your wife, and I will try to be a good wife for you. You are already more than I hoped for." Yates said honestly. Then, gathering his courage, he added, I know this started as an arrangement, a practical solution for both of us. But Helena, I hope that in time it might become something more. She studied him, her eyes searching his face. Though she might not have understood every word, she grasped his meaning. Yes, she whispered. Something more, I hope this too. The wedding took place the next morning in the small church at Fort Stanton. The preacher was a kind-faced man named Reverend Thompson, who had agreed to perform the ceremony despite the unusual circumstances. Mrs. Chen stood as witness, along with Jack Riley and the other ranch hands, who had cleaned up surprisingly well for the occasion. Helena wore a dress she had sewn herself during the journey from San Francisco, a simple white cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She had pinned wildflowers in her dark hair, and when Yates saw her walking toward him down the short aisle, his breath caught in his chest. The ceremony was brief. Reverend Thompson spoke the words, and Yates and Helena repeated their vows, her accent thick but her voice clear and certain. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Yates leaned down and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that promised tenderness and patience. They held a small celebration at the ranch afterward, Mrs. Chen having prepared enough food to feed an army. The ranch hands played fiddle and harmonica, and though Helena did not know the American songs, she clapped along, her face radiant with joy. When Yates took her hand and led her in a simple dance, she laughed and stumbled over the unfamiliar steps, but she held tight to him, trusting him to guide her. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, the reality of their wedding night loomed. Yates walked Helena to the house, his heart pounding. They had not discussed this, could barely communicate complex thoughts, but they were married now. This was expected. Inside their bedroom, Helena stood nervously by the window. Yates lit the lamp, casting the room in warm light, then turned to her. Helena, he said softly, we do not have to. If you are not ready, we can wait. She looked at him, confusion and something else in her eyes. He tried again, searching for simpler words. Tonight we can sleep, just sleep. No rush. Understanding dawned, and Helena's expression softened with gratitude. She crossed to him and took both his hands in hers. She spoke in Polish first, a longer sentence full of emotion, then switched to English. You are kind man, but I am your wife now. I want to be good wife. You are already a good wife, Yates assured her. He cupped her face gently, his thumb stroking her cheek. I just want you to be happy and comfortable. We have time. Helena rose on her toes and kissed him, more boldly than she had in the church. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. I trust you, she said in careful English. I am ready. What passed between them that night was tender and sweet, two people learning each other in the most intimate way possible. Yates was gentle, patient, mindful of her nervousness. And Helena, though inexperienced, gave herself to him with a trust that humbled him. Afterward, they lay entwined in the darkness, and Yates felt something shift in his chest. This woman, this brave, beautiful woman who had crossed the world on faith alone, was his wife. And he would spend the rest of his life proving himself worthy of that trust. The days that followed fell into a new pattern. Helena's English improved rapidly, their conversations becoming more complex and nuanced. She learned the words for her feelings, and Yates discovered that beneath her quiet exterior was a sharp wit and a playful sense of humor. She teased him about his terrible attempts at speaking Polish, and he retaliated by teaching her cowboy slang that made Mrs. Chen shake her head in mock disapproval. But more than that, they were building something real. What had started as a practical arrangement was transforming into genuine affection. Yates found himself hurrying through his work so he could return to the house, to Helena. He loved the way her face lit up when he came through the door, the way she would rush to tell him about her day in her improving English, her hands gesturing animatedly when words failed her. Helena, for her part, had fallen in love with the land. She would stand on the porch in the early mornings, watching the sun rise over the mountains, her face peaceful in a way it had never been in the crowded streets of Warsaw. She planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil, and took pride in contributing to their household. And she was falling in love with Yates, though she had not yet found the English words to tell him. 2 months into their marriage, on a crisp October morning, Yates was working in the barn when he heard a commotion from the house. He dropped the bridle he had been mending and ran toward the sound, his heart in his throat. He found Helena in the kitchen, Mrs. Chen beside her, both women talking rapidly. Helena's face was pale, one hand pressed to her stomach. Terror gripped Yates. "What is wrong? Helena, are you hurt?" Helena looked at him, and slowly a smile spread across her face. She said something in Polish, then switched to English. "I am not hurt. I am. Mrs. Chen says the word is expecting." The world seemed to stop. "Expecting, you mean?" "A baby," Helena confirmed, her voice wondering. "We will have a baby." Yates crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides and swept her into his arms, spinning her around. Helena laughed, the sound bright and clear, and when he set her down, there were tears in her eyes, happy tears. "A baby," Yates repeated, the reality sinking in. "We are going to have a baby." That night they lay in bed, Yates's hand spread across Helena's still flat stomach. "I hope he has your eyes," Helena said softly. "He. What makes you think it is a boy?" Helena shrugged, a smile playing at her lips. "Just a feeling, a son for you." "I do not care if it is a boy or girl," Yates said honestly, "as long as you are both healthy." Helena turned in his arms, her face serious. "Yates, I need to tell you something, in English so you understand all the words." She took a breath, gathering her thoughts. "When I came here, I was so scared. Everything was strange and new, and I could not even speak to you. I thought maybe I had made terrible mistake." Yates started to speak, but she pressed her fingers to his lips. "Let me finish. But then I met you, and you were so patient, so kind. You could have been angry that I spoke no English, but instead you learned my language. You worked hard to understand me, and every day I fell more in love with you. This baby, it is not just a baby. It is proof of the new life we are building together, and I am not scared anymore." Yates caught her hand and kissed her palm. "I love you, Helena. I think I have loved you since I saw you standing on that train platform, looking brave and terrified all at once. You are the strongest person I have ever met. You love me." Helena's eyes shone. "You have never said this before." "I love you," Yates repeated firmly. "I should have said it sooner." "I love you too," Helena whispered, in English and in Polish. "Kocham sai." "Kocham sai," Yates repeated, his pronunciation better than it had been months ago. The pregnancy was not easy. As winter set in, Helena suffered from terrible sickness that kept her in bed for weeks. Yates hovered anxiously, bringing her weak tea and dry bread, holding her hair back when she was ill, sitting beside the bed reading to her in his improving Polish when she could not sleep. Mrs. Chen proved invaluable during this time, sharing remedies from her own culture, and providing the kind of maternal comfort Helena desperately missed. The 2 women had formed a deep bond despite their different languages and backgrounds, finding common ground in their experiences as immigrants making lives in this harsh land. By spring, Helena's sickness had passed, and she bloomed. Her belly swelled, and Yates would spend hours with his hand pressed against it, feeling the baby kick and turn. They argued gently about names, Helena wanting something that honored both their heritages, Yates insisting only that it be something their child could pronounce without difficulty. On a warm May evening in 1877, Helena's pains began. Mrs. Chen sent Jack Riley racing to Fort Stanton for the doctor, while Yates helped Helena to the bed. He was terrified, more frightened than he had ever been facing down hostile forces or stampeding cattle. This was his wife, his Helena, and she was in pain, and there was nothing he could do to help. "Do not leave me," Helena gasped between contractions, gripping his hand hard enough to bruise. "Never," Yates promised. "I am right here." The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Yates stayed by Helena's side the entire time, ignoring Mrs. Chen's gentle suggestions that he might prefer to wait outside. He mopped her brow, held her hand, and murmured encouragement in both English and Polish. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon, a baby's cry filled the room. The doctor, who had arrived hours earlier, held up a squirming, red-faced infant. "Congratulations, Mr. Anderson. You have a son." Yates felt tears streaming down his face as the doctor placed the baby in Helena's arms. She looked exhausted but radiant, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her smile brighter than the sun. "We have a son," she said wonderingly. "Yates, look at him. He is perfect." The baby was indeed perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into the same chestnut brown as his mother's. They named him Thomas Joseph Anderson, honoring Yates's father and Helena's brother. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and exhilarating. Thomas was a good baby, but he still woke frequently in the night, and both Yates and Helena stumbled through their days in a fog of sleep deprivation. But there was joy too, so much joy it sometimes overwhelmed Yates. Watching Helena nurse their son, singing Polish lullabies in her sweet voice, or seeing Thomas's face light up when Yates came home from the fields made every hardship worthwhile. Helena's English was now nearly fluent, though her accent remained thick. She had also taught Yates enough Polish that he could hold basic conversations, and they often slipped between languages without thinking, creating a unique family dialect that belonged only to them. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the Anderson ranch prospered. Yates expanded his herd, hired more hands, and built a larger house with a proper nursery and a sitting room where Helena could sew and read. They became fixtures in the Fort Stanton community, Helena's warm nature and generous spirit winning over even those who had initially viewed her with suspicion. On their third anniversary, Yates surprised Helena with a piano, shipped all the way from St. Louis. It had cost a small fortune, but the look on her face when she saw it made every penny worth it. She had mentioned once in passing that her mother had played, and she had loved to listen as a child. "Yates, this is too much," Helena protested, even as her fingers itched to touch the keys. "Nothing is too much for you," Yates said, pulling her close. "You gave up everything to come here. Let me give you something back." Helena began taking lessons from the wife of an army officer stationed at the fort, and soon the evenings were filled with music. Thomas would clap his chubby hands in delight, and Yates would sit in his chair, watching his wife and son, marveling at how full his life had become. But life on the frontier was never without challenges. In the summer of 1879, a drought struck the territory. Water sources dried up, grass turned brown and brittle, and cattle died by the dozens. Yates worked himself to exhaustion, trying to keep his herd alive, riding out each day before dawn and returning long after dark. Helena watched her husband slowly break under the strain. He lost weight, dark circles appeared under his eyes, and the easy smile she loved disappeared. She tried to help in every way she could, economizing on household expenses, taking on more work herself, but she felt helpless watching him suffer. One evening, Yates came home to find Helena waiting on the porch, Thomas already asleep inside. She had made lemonade from their precious remaining stores, and she handed him a glass without a word. Yates drank deeply, then sank into the chair beside her. "I lost another 10 head today. I do not know how much longer I can hold on." Helena took his hand. "We will find a way, we always do." "You should not have married a rancher," Yates said bitterly. "You should have married someone who could give you security, comfort." Helena turned his face toward her, her expression fierce. "I married the man I love. The man who learned my language so he could know my heart. The man who held my hand through the birth of our son. I do not want comfort if it means losing you. We will survive this together." Her words, spoken in flawless English with that accent he had grown to love, broke something open in Yates's chest. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, drawing strength from her certainty. They did survive, though it was close. Yates sold off some of his land to a neighboring rancher, a difficult decision but a necessary one. The money allowed him to purchase feed for his remaining cattle and drill a deeper well. When the rains finally came in the fall, they had weathered the worst of it. That winter, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in June of 1880 she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose Marie, and she had her father's blue eyes and a temperament as sunny as her name suggested. Thomas, now nearly 3, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit beside her cradle for hours, telling her stories in his mixed English and Polish, making her laugh with silly faces. Watching them together, Yates felt his heart might burst from fullness. "We have a beautiful family," Helena said one evening, nursing Rose while Thomas dozed against Yates's side. "We do," Yates agreed. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life. 4 years ago I was alone, convinced I would spend my whole life that way. Now I have you, Thomas, Rose. I have everything. You took a chance on a woman who could not even speak your language," Helena reminded him with a smile. "Best decision I ever made," Yates said firmly. He leaned over and kissed her, careful not to disturb the nursing baby. "Though I admit, it was terrifying at first." "For me too," Helena confessed. "I stepped off that train and saw you standing there, this tall cowboy with kind eyes, and I thought, what have I done? I cannot even ask him for water if I am thirsty." "You could have turned around and gotten back on that train," Yates pointed out. Helena shook her head. "No. Even then I knew. Something in my heart said this was right, and I was correct." As the children grew, they became the bridge between their mother's heritage and their father's. They spoke both English and Polish fluently, celebrated both American holidays and the Polish traditions Helena taught them. Thomas learned to ride and rope alongside his father, but he also learned to cook pierogi with his mother. Rose had her mother's gift for sewing and her father's head for numbers. The ranch continued to prosper. Yates's reputation as an honest dealer and skilled rancher spread, and his herd grew to nearly 500 head. He built a proper schoolhouse on his land, hiring a teacher so that Thomas, Rose, and the children of his ranch hands could receive an education. Helena became known throughout the territory for her kindness and her skill as a seamstress. Women would travel from miles away to have her create dresses for special occasions, and she would always accept payment on terms they could afford, sometimes trading for goods or services rather than cash. In 1885, when Thomas was 8 and Rose was 5, Helena gave birth to twin boys, Daniel and James. The house was now constantly filled with noise, laughter, and chaos. Yates added another room, then another, until their home sprawled across the hilltop, a testament to their growing family. Despite the demands of 4 children and a working ranch, Yates and Helena made time for each other. They had a ritual of sitting on the porch after the children were in bed, talking about their day, making plans for the future, or simply sitting in comfortable silence. Their love had deepened over the years, growing from those tentative first days into something solid and unshakable. "You ever miss Poland?" Yates asked one evening, the question that had occasionally haunted him over the years. Helena considered, her head resting on his shoulder. "I miss some things. The food my mother made, the sound of church bells in my village, but this is my home now. You are my home. I would not trade this life for anything." "Not even for a husband who could speak Polish when you met him," Yates teased. "Especially not for that," Helena said, poking him in the ribs. "Learning to talk to each other, really talk, not just with words but with our hearts, that made us strong. We built everything together from nothing. That is special." In 1890, as New Mexico Territory continued to grow and change, Yates was approached about running for territorial legislature. He was well respected in the community, known for his fairness and his willingness to work with people of all backgrounds. But he was hesitant. "It would mean time away from the ranch, from you and the children," he told Helena. "It would also mean you could help shape the future of this territory," Helena countered. "You could make things better for everyone, not just us. I think you should do it." With Helena's support, Yates ran and won. His time in the legislature was marked by his advocacy for public education and fair treatment of immigrant communities, causes close to his heart thanks to his wife's influence. Helena accompanied him to Santa Fe when she could, her grace and warmth making her a favorite among the political wives. The children thrived. Thomas, serious and steady, took to ranching like he had been born to it. By the time he was 16, he was managing most of the day-to-day operations, giving Yates more time for his political work. Rose, creative and spirited, announced her intention to become a teacher, much to her parents' pride. The twins, wild and inseparable, kept everyone on their toes with their constant schemes and adventures. In 1895, on a warm spring day much like the one when they had married, Yates and Helena celebrated their 20th anniversary. Their children had planned a party, inviting everyone from miles around. The celebration was held at the ranch, tables laden with food representing both Helena's Polish heritage and their adopted Western home. As the sun set and music filled the air, Yates led Helena onto the makeshift dance floor, just as he had done on their wedding day. But now they moved together with the ease of long practice, knowing each other's steps instinctively. 20 years, Helena marveled. Where did the time go? "I could ask the same," Yates said. "Seems like yesterday you were stepping off that train, looking at me like I was a stranger, which I suppose I was." "The kindest stranger I ever met," Helena said. She looked around at their children, at the friends and neighbors who had become family, at the life they had built together. "You know what amazes me most? How much you changed your whole life for me. You learned a new language, you opened your heart to traditions you had never heard of, you made space for me to be myself. That is real love." "You did the same for me," Yates pointed out. "You left everything you knew, learned a new language, adapted to this harsh land." "If anything, you are the brave one," Helena laughed. "We are both brave and both very lucky." "Lucky to have found each other," Yates agreed. He pulled her closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I love you, Helena Anderson, just as much today as the day I married you. More even." "Kachem sai," Helena whispered back, the Polish words she had taught him so long ago. "Forever and always." As they danced under the stars, surrounded by the evidence of their love and hard work, Yates reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A telegram, a leap of faith, a woman who spoke no English and a cowboy determined to understand her. It had seemed impossible at first, but they had built something remarkable together. The music swelled, and their children joined them on the dance floor. Thomas with his sweetheart, a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread. Rose with the young teacher who had caught her eye. Even the twins, now 13 and tall as saplings, awkwardly attempting to dance with giggling girls from town. This was their legacy, Yates thought. Not just the ranch or the land, but this family they had created, this bridge between two worlds. Their children spoke two languages, understood two cultures, and were richer for it. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Helena stood on the porch of their home, Yates beside her, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. The sounds of their children getting ready for bed drifted from inside, a familiar and beloved soundtrack to their lives. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, slipping his arm around her waist. "About that scared girl who stepped off the train so many years ago," Helena said softly. "How she could not have imagined this life, this happiness. If someone had told her then what the future held, she would not have believed it. Would she have still gotten off the train?" Helena turned to face him, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. In a heartbeat, even scared, even uncertain, something told her she was exactly where she needed to be. They stood together in the gathering darkness, the porch light casting a warm glow around them. Inside, their children's voices rose in laughter, and Helena smiled at the sound. "Come," she said, taking Yates's hand. "Let us go tuck them in, tell them stories, remind them how loved they are." "Just like we do every night," Yates said, but he followed her willingly, as he always had and always would. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as life always does. They lost Mrs. Chen in 1897, mourning the woman who had been friend, helper, and surrogate mother to Helena. They celebrated Thomas's wedding in 1899, welcoming a daughter-in-law into their family. Rose left for teaching college in 1900, the first of their children to venture beyond New Mexico territory. But through it all, Yates and Helena remained each other's constant. They weathered every storm together, celebrated every triumph side by side. Their love, forged in those early days of patience and determination, proved stronger than steel. In 1906, New Mexico was still years away from statehood, but the Anderson family had become an institution in their corner of the territory. Yates had retired from the legislature, content to focus on the ranch and his growing number of grandchildren. Helena still sewed, though her eyes were not as sharp as they once had been, and she preferred now to spend her time teaching her granddaughters the intricate embroidery of her homeland. On a summer evening, Yates and Helena sat on their porch, much as they had done countless times before. They were both in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined by sun and laughter and years of living. But when Helena looked at Yates, she still saw the young cowboy who had greeted her with wildflowers and patience. And when Yates looked at Helena, he still saw the brave young woman who had trusted him with her future. "Tell me again," their granddaughter Sophie asked, curled up between them. "Tell me about when grandmother came to America and could not speak English." It was a story the children loved, one that had been told and retold until it had taken on the quality of legend. But Helena never tired of sharing it. "Well," she began, her accent still present but softened by decades of speaking English. "I was very scared when I got off that train. Everything was so different from my home in Poland. And when I saw your grandfather standing there, so tall and handsome but a complete stranger, I did not know what to think." "But grandfather learned to speak Polish," Sophie prompted, knowing the story by heart but wanting to hear it again. "He did," Helena confirmed, smiling at Yates. "He worked so hard every single day learning my language so we could understand each other, and I learned English too, but it took time. We had to be very patient with each other." That is what love is, Yates added, pulling Helena closer. Patience. Trying to understand someone, really understand them, even when it is difficult. Your grandmother and I, we built our whole life on that foundation. Sophie considered this seriously. I think that is very romantic. Helena laughed, the sound still as bright as it had been when she was 22. It was romantic. It still is. After Sophie had been sent off to bed, Yates and Helena remained on the porch. The ranch was quieter now than it had been when their children were young, but it still hummed with life. In the distance, they could hear cattle lowing, the soft voices of ranch hands ending their day, the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods Yates had planted years ago so Helena would have shade in the summer. You remember, Yates said suddenly, that first dinner we had together, with Mrs. Chen translating everything. Of course, Helena said. You were so nervous you barely ate. I was terrified, Yates admitted. I had no idea what I was doing. Mail-order bride seemed like such a simple solution when I sent that letter, but then you arrived, and you were real, and I realized I had taken on a huge responsibility. And now, Yates pulled her into his arms, kissing the top of her head. Now I know it was the best decision I ever made. You taught me so much, Helena, about courage, about love, about building a life based on understanding and respect rather than just passion. We taught each other, Helena corrected. That is what marriage is, I think. Two people helping each other become better versions of themselves. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, their son's family was settling down for the night, the next generation of Andersons carrying on the legacy they had begun. I would do it all again, Helena said softly. Every difficult moment, every time I struggled to find the right English word, every challenge we faced, I would do it all again in a heartbeat. So would I, Yates agreed. Though maybe next time I would learn Polish first, make it a bit easier on both of us. Helena laughed and swatted his arm playfully. Where is the adventure in that? As the moon rose over the New Mexico landscape, casting silver light across the ranch, Yates Anderson held his wife close and reflected on the miracle of their life together. A woman who spoke no English and a cowboy who knew only determination and kindness had built something extraordinary. They had created not just a family, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Their story would be told and retold, passed down through the years as an example of what was possible when two people committed to truly understanding each other. The mail-order bride who arrived speaking no English, and the cowboy who learned her language and her love had become a legend. But more importantly, they had become partners, lovers, best friends, and soulmates. In the end, that was the greatest triumph. Not the successful ranch, not the children and grandchildren, not even the respect they had earned in their community. It was the simple fact that they had found each other across an ocean and a language barrier, had chosen each other every single day since, and had built a love that would outlast them both. Kacham sigh, Yates whispered, the words now as natural to him as breathing. I love you too, Helena replied in English and then in Polish. Forever, my darling, forever. And in that moment, sitting on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and a love well tended, Yates and Helena Anderson had everything they could ever want. They had each other, and that had always been enough. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Winter snows gave way to spring flowers, which yielded to summer heat, which mellowed into autumn's golden light. Through it all, the Anderson Ranch endured, a testament to the power of hard work, determination, and love. As they grew older, Yates and Helena spent more time sitting than working, more time remembering than planning. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by time and experience into something unbreakable. Their children and grandchildren would always remember them this way, sitting together on that porch, hands clasped, speaking to each other in that unique blend of English and Polish that was theirs alone. Two people who had started as strangers divided by language and culture, who had become one through patience, effort, and an unwavering commitment to understanding each other. And when, many years later, they were finally laid to rest side by side in the cemetery overlooking the ranch, their headstone bore an inscription in both English and Polish. Here lie Yates and Helena Anderson. In life and in death, forever united, their love knew no boundaries. It was a fitting epitaph for a love story that had begun with a telegram and a leap of faith, and had ended only when death finally parted them. But even then, those who knew them best believed that not even death could truly separate Yates and Helena. Their love was too strong, too deep, too eternal for that. The ranch continued, passed down through generations of Andersons who carried forward the legacy of hard work, integrity, and the belief that love could overcome any obstacle. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and the stars emerged one by one in the vast New Mexico sky, some swore they could still hear the sound of Helena's laughter and Yates's gentle voice, speaking to each other in their own special language of love. Their story became more than just family history. It became inspiration, proof that the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. A mail-order bride who arrived speaking no English, and a cowboy determined to learn her language had shown that real love required effort, patience, and the willingness to meet someone where they were. They had built bridges across every divide, and in doing so had created something that would endure long after they were gone. In the end, theirs was a simple story made extraordinary by commitment. They had chosen each other, worked for each other, fought for each other, and loved each other with everything they had. And that, more than anything else, was the legacy they left behind. A reminder that love, real love, was always worth the effort, no matter how difficult the beginning might be.